Hi, I'm Tom with a list of interesting things. This is going to be a recreation of a presentation given at the Dewville College Conversations Speaker Series. Let's dive right in.
Hi, I'm Tom, and I'm a political junkie. I'm the former office manager, IT director, and coordinator of volunteers for one of the local parties. I'm a political consultant now working out of DC. To date, I've worked on 8 Senate races, 15 Assembly races, 5 Congressional races, dozens of local races, and 1 exceedingly chilly presidential campaign. I also have an educational YouTube channel called The List of Interesting Things, where I examine different facets of the world, often political and governmental, and discuss the wonderful and interesting things about them, all while ranking them against each other. Now, I'm wholesale addicted to politics, but The List of Interesting Things is my baby. It contains on it all the most wonderful, exciting, and interesting facets of humanity and the world around us. Importantly, nothing at all on the list of interesting things is unpleasant or unhappy. That's not the point of the list. It contains only the things that bring joy or curiosity, inspiration or wonder to the viewer. Sometimes that means talking about Teddy Roosevelt and how he was actually insane. Sometimes that means discussing particularly interesting lizards to pique intrigue into the minds of any budding zoologists and herpetologists just itching to know about the molting patterns of Komodo dragons. This list contains many things. You will not find on the list what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about voting methods. We're going to discuss how votes are counted in the United States, what processes and challenges voters face, and we're going to discuss this statement. Your vote does not matter. A lot of people say this. A lot of people preach this. Consequently, a lot of people believe it. And I'm not here to tell you if they're right or wrong. You're the only person who can decide that. I am here to ask why. Why do people say this? Why do people spend their time shouting from the hilltops that your vote doesn't matter? And to give my thoughts on the same. We'll start right here. Your vote does not matter because you're only one person. What matter have I, you might ask, in the grand scheme of things? What matter does my vote have in an election of 160 million? There's some truth to this. The chances of you being the deciding vote in any election are very small. In a presidential election, even if you happen to live in the least populous state, the beautiful Wyoming, where you are presumably outnumbered by the buffalo 10-1, you're still only one of 579,000 people. Well, I'm reminded of this most beautiful meme. I'd show the clip, but I'd be afraid of it breaking the stream, where this charming Bostonian says while clutching her donkey's iced coffee that voting is a team sport. We all work together to make change. It's uncommon for anyone to make change alone. And if that marvelous display of patriotism does not sway you, let me give you 2 examples. First, the more famous one. The 2000 presidential election between Bush and Gore will be remembered by many of our faculty very well. For those of us perhaps a little too young, this was among the closest elections in U.S. history. It was a dead heat right up until the end, and it ended up being decided by less than 600 votes and introducing to the world the idea of a hanging Chad. Literally 600. In the deciding state of Florida, it was decided by 537 votes. It's fairly rare, but not unheard of, for in large-scale elections, individuals' votes to matter very strongly. That doesn't even mention local elections. The New York 27th race is a hot one, has been for years. For those of you who don't know, the New York 27th Congressional District stretches from Niagara Falls to Rochester and halfway down to Jamestown. Until recently, it featured Chris Collins until he was appointed ambassador to the Junior Alliance for Insider Trading Leagues. In a special election last spring, it was won by Chris Jacobs, a former state senator, and he's up for re-election this year. His opponent is named Nate McMurray. McMurray has an interesting story. He's the former Grand Island town supervisor, which is sort of like the governor for the town of Grand Island. He won that seat in 2015, and while he was supervisor, he pushed to make the Grand Island bridges cashless, I should say. He helped secure funding for the big Grand Island Welcome Center you see on the side of the 190 when you drive down the highway. Now, whether you like these moves or not, they are undoubtedly significant changes. And with those significant changes on his resume, he was able to run for Congress, but here's the kicker. Nate McMurray won that race by 14 votes. 14. That means that if 14 fewer people had shown up on that blustery November Tuesday, there would be a different person running for Congress today. Or indeed, if 15 more of Mary Cook's voters had turned up, then in 2020, there may be a very different look to the Grand Island bridges or the I-190 highway. This kind of razor-thin race happens all the time, dozens of them all across the state and all across the country in every election cycle. elections decided by margins smaller than a cocktail dinner party, or a college football team, or a family barbecue. I don't know if this one pans out. It's true much of the time, but sooner or later, if a voter casts a vote every year, then eventually they'll make the difference. Up next, your vote doesn't matter because they're all the same. They don't care about me. They don't care about anything. They lie. They cheat. They're only in it for themselves. They're selfish and brutal and amoral. Every leader, every member of government, every politician cares about nothing but money, power. It's a very powerful statement, and quite a criticism. It's difficult to know someone, I should say, to know if someone is trustworthy, unless you know them personally. And even then, it's still hard. There's two ways to look at this statement. There's a cynical way, and there's my way. First, the cynical way. From the cynical perspective, I'm inclined to wonder if it's even relevant. If it matters whether they're doing the right thing because it's the right thing, or if they're doing the right thing because it's personally profitable. I don't know that I care from a cynical perspective. Say you support environmental reform. Okay, along comes a candidate who says they want to fund solar projects. Sounds good, but you're a cynic. You don't trust them to act in the best interest of the people. They're only after power, after all. To you, as an environmentalist, does it matter why they did it? Similarly, say you're a fiscal conservative. You want tax dollars reduced for the American worker. Very reasonable. Along comes a candidate who wants to lower taxes across the board, but you're a critic. You think they only want to lower taxes for their own profit, for their own wallets. I wonder again, does it matter to you as a fiscal conservative why they did what you wanted them to do? From an ethical perspective, absolutely. A person's reasoning matters. But from a policy perspective, I'm not so sure. That's the cynical response to this statement. Many people hold this view, and I understand why, and I respect it. But that's not the one I take. Maybe I'm still a little youthful and idealistic, but I just can't get behind it. There are a lot of terrible people out there. People out for power at the expense of all those around them, at the expense of the system they swore to protect and the people they swore to serve. Those people exist. I've met them. Some of them I've fought against, and some of them I've worked with. But there are also good people, kind people with stars in their eyes and binders full of notes on how they're going to make the world a better place. People who leave six-figure jobs to dive into dinky little justice ships or the outside chance at a congressional run. I've met teachers who run for legislature to try to get lunches for their kids, and popular, well-off personalities risking their livelihoods just to try to make a clerk's office a little bit better. Many people in politics and government, I might even say most people, don't do it to line their own pockets. Frankly, most of them don't make that much. Most of them are just people trying to make a dark world a little bit brighter. And they are the ones who will enact those policies that you care about for the right reasons. They're the ones who really try to make the world a better place, and they have just as much contempt for those cruel, selfish, power-hungry people as you or I do. And the only way to ensure that those good people never get into office is if nobody votes for them. Finally, my personal favorite. Your vote does not matter because the whole system's rigged. The way the system is set up is unfair. The system is set up so that money talks. It's set up so that the rich and the powerful stay rich and powerful, and they won't let my vote change that. This one's interesting. In some ways it's true, and we'll get into voter suppression in a minute. But first, I want to touch on my favorite counterargument to this particular statement. It's the most compelling piece of evidence against the idea that votes aren't counted, or that races are decided before or after the event. Every single one of the most influential people in the United States votes. Jeff Bezos is voting. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are voting. It's true that Bill Gates makes $100 a second. It's also true that he will be spending some of that time between now and November 3rd voting. The richest and most powerful people have a turnout rate that approaches 100%. The richest and most powerful can throw their money around. Taylor Swift can push for voter turnout. And the Koch brothers can bankroll political campaigns, but they will still vote. because they know that whether you're making $14,000 or $400,000 or $400 million a year, their vote counts exactly the same as every person in this Zoom call. Now, that's not to say that there aren't historical and contemporary attempts to swing elections. Electioneering has a long and creative history in the United States. The late 19th to mid-20th century saw Jim Crow laws which, among other things, made it difficult, approaching impossible for black people in the South to vote. There were poll taxes, which made fees, sometimes of exorbitant amounts, compulsory before a ballot could be cast. Literacy tests, which were purportedly designed to test a voter's knowledge of the English language and familiarity with government, but in reality were designed to be failed. I wonder how many people watching this would remember the legally prescribed dimensions of the District of Columbia off the top of their heads. This was one of the main tenets of the Civil Rights era, to end voter discrimination, but it continued. Voter intimidation in the 80s, registration prohibition for former felons, strict guidelines for who could register to vote, and when, and where, often disproportionately targeting immigrants and minorities. As recently as this year, there have been attempts to limit the number of ballot drop-off boxes and polling locations in places like California, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Aspersions cast against vote-by-mail initiatives nationwide. Attempts all to limit the number of people that vote. Attempts, in short, to rig the system. But all of these things, even the ones happening right now, have a common thread. They're all being fought against. From the 24th Amendment finally killing poll taxes, to courts in the 80s halting voter intimidation tactics, to Florida granting voting rights to felons just 2 years ago, to today, where high-ranking intelligence officials are coming out in support of mail-in voting. Court battles are being fought as we speak in Pennsylvania and California to expand voting rights even in spite of the pandemic. Don't get me wrong, this stuff is dangerous and it is real. And I don't want to give off the impression that this stuff is behind us. It's not. There are good people, honest people, well-meaning people who say that this kind of thing cannot happen here. People who say that our democracy is strong and too old, too flexible and too resistant to change for these terrible things to happen here. Those people are wrong. It can happen here. It can and it does. Our democracy, our system of voting is not some ancient unassailable force. It is not resistant to the weathering of time or the influence of terrible people. Our democracy is fragile and precious, and if we don't protect it, we will lose it. There are many people and many organizations who benefit from low voter turnout. Organizations who benefit from only those individuals voting who are already engaged, already connected, already well off. They are the ones who say that your vote doesn't matter. When people tell you that your vote doesn't matter, those are the people who want you to stay home. Those are the people who benefit from numbers like 36% voter turnout in Erie County last year. 36. 17% in New York City. 14 in Lovejoy, just down the street from DUville's campus. 14 in Lovejoy, meaning about 7 in every 8 Americans living in one of the most well-populated places in the country let someone else decide who was going to be fixing their roads. 86% of those residents let someone else decide how high their rent was going to be, what their tax policy was going to be, what their gun control policy was going to be, what their police policy was going to be. Now, I had to concatenate some data for this, so it might be off by 1% or 2. But the point stands. These people did not vote because someone told them that their vote didn't matter and they believed them. So is this statement true? Does your vote matter? You're the only one who gets to decide that, but I sure think it does. I think it does now more than ever. I think that the people watching this have the capacity to be the most engaged voters in the history of the world. You have TV. You have the internet. You have the ability to see exactly what your vote is going to do and exactly who it's going to affect. I think your vote matters to those people. I think your vote matters to the mother of 2 working 2 jobs to try to feed her kids. Your vote matters to the deli owner at the corner of your block whose taxes are too high to pay their employees. It matters to the South and Central American immigrants whose fate one way or the other is today uncertain. And it matters to the citizens of Kabul and Jalalabad, in whose homes we are at war today. Your vote matters to the kids in the downtown Buffalo schools whose parents can't afford to buy them books. It matters to that kid's teacher who pays out of pocket to get their students more supplies because their school can't get funding. And right now, today, it matters to the people who have to tell young children that their grandparents just died of COVID. And it matters to the restaurant owner who was shut down for 6 months and had to close his doors. Your vote matters to every single one of those people. It may be the case that you go to the polls to vote, and you vote for what you want, and what you want doesn't happen. That's life. Sometimes what you work for you don't get. Sometimes you fight and you fight and you lose. But it will be a sad day in a dark world when we all decide to stop fighting. So I say, in defiance of those people who don't want you to vote, those people who want you to stay home, and I say in support of those families who have lost loved ones and who have closed their doors forever, I think your vote does matter. Thank you very much.